Hello and welcome to the British Foreign Policy Group. I am the director, Sophia Gaston, and this is part of a series of conversations that we're having with interesting people around the world who are able to offer unique insights and evidence on the coronavirus pandemic and a whole bunch of other issues that are bubbling beneath the surface. We're here today to discuss conspiracy theories and particularly their role in the COVID-19 pandemic. Conspiracy theories are of great interest to me as a social researcher, but they're also of great relevance to British foreign policy and to governance more generally in the West and elsewhere. They work to undermine institutions and social trust. And it's also true that many conspiracy theories, and this is certainly the case during this pandemic, complain to geopolitics and the national discussions around these. Joining me today is Joe Uscinski from the University of Miami. He's really one of the foremost experts in conspiracy thinking, particularly in the United States context. We've collaborated on research before, and he's really someone who understands both the kind of political dynamism at play and is able to straddle the academic and political worlds very effectively. So welcome, Joe.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I think let's start by stepping back a little bit and looking at the bigger picture around conspiracy theories. So you've been studying these for a long time. What is the context of the conspiracy theory landscape predating the crisis? Really thinking about the past decade and how conspiracy theories have been evolving in the United States.
So there's two dynamics that we should. Conspiracy theories tend to be for losers. And by losers, I mean not in a pejorative sense, but in a descriptive sense. Usually when a party loses an election, it's the members of that party who are upset. And they say, we were cheated, everything was rigged against us. So it's much easier for people to blame a shadowy plot against them for their own shortcomings than it is to look in a mirror and say, what did I do wrong? So you can chart this over going back at least more than 100 years. But in the last 30 years, when Clinton was president, it was, he killed Vince Foster and Whitewater and all these other cover-ups and the Clinton kill list. And then he left, and then it was Bush did 9/11 and Halliburton and Cheney. And then he left, and people didn't care about those things anymore. It was Obama's faked birth certificate. And Obama killed the kids at Sandy Hook, and Obama blew up the Deepwater Horizon well. And then Trump showed up, and that dynamic continued for the most part, where you had Democrats really freaking out about their unexpected loss and blaming that on a vast conspiracy with Russia. But at the same time that happened, what's unique in these last couple of years is that Trump built a coalition of people who are sort of off the beaten path of mainstream politics. And he used conspiracy theories as a calling card in building that coalition. So once he got to office, he didn't stop using conspiracy theories. He decided to dance with the girl who brought him to the prom. So he kept using them. So that's why even after he won, after he became, the occupant of the most powerful office in the world, he says, I was cheated. There were 3 million illegal voters who voted against me, and everything's a hoax out to take down my presidency, and I'm being abused. And for most presidents, that doesn't work. So when Hillary Clinton said that her and her husband were the victim of a vast right-wing conspiracy back in the late 90s, that became a coffee mug. People laughed at it. It doesn't work well. But here it works well because that's his persona. He has framed himself as an outsider, even as president. So it sort of meshes with the image he wants to portray, that there are shadowy conspiracies against him. So the world we're living in now in the US is that you have the party in power is using conspiracy theories to defend themselves, and the party out of power is using them to build their coalition, to explain their loss in 2016, and to alert their members to potential oncoming dangers. A lot of which is they're going to keep us from voting. They're not going to have an election. They're going to become authoritarian, permanent dictators. So that's the one dynamic. And then the second one is there's more continuity than there is change in all of this. I mean, people, if you read the headlines, people get the impression that, oh my God, people are believing conspiracy theories now. But there is no time when people weren't doing that. There is no time where there wasn't conspiracy theories about pandemics or presidents or the economy or anything. They were always there, and the numbers don't seem to be going up as a rule. And in fact, there's no evidence that that's the case. So I would say the forces that drive these beliefs tend to be stable most of the time, and that it's people on both sides of the political aisle that buy into these theories, and independents do it too, if not more. So there's more stability there. The one thing that gives me pause, the one thing that's different now in the US, is that you have a president who's pushing conspiracy theories almost every day, and bizarre, weird ones too, like Ted Cruz's dad killed JFK and stuff like that. So when you have that going on, those theories are reaching a much wider audience than they otherwise would, because they're coming from a partisan leader that people in that party trust, and people are going to buy into it, even if they don't have a strong disposition to believe in conspiracy theories.
So I suppose what this comes to is this question about the mainstreaming of conspiracy theories. And I suppose particularly over the past 5 or 6 years, as populism, populist politics, populist rhetoric, which of course is peddling this anti-establishment narrative, as that has become much more prominent in Western politics in particular. We know that it played a huge role in the 2016 presidential election. It's played a role in numerous other European elections since. There's quite a lot of evidence that populist parties and so on are becoming more electorally successful, and that their rhetoric, their narratives and so on is influencing policy environments. So how can we understand conspiracy theories within this context? What is this relationship between conspiracy theories and populism? And as you mentioned, when you have a president like Trump, who he himself is promoting conspiracy narratives, what is the effect in terms of the national psychology and I suppose the normalizing of these kinds of narratives?
So in terms of mainstreaming conspiracy theories, I think there are a couple of ways where that can happen. And the most profound way is when you have political elites trafficking in them. So whether it's our president or our senators and Congress people, or if it's hitting the more mainstream news outlets that have wide audiences. Now, in terms of the media, it's been going on for a while. So there's a lot of conspiracy movies out there, and you can go back decades, whether it's Oliver Stone's JFK, but you can put on the History Channel now, which I thought was supposed to be about real history. And the most popular show there is Ancient Aliens, which is all conspiracy nonsense. If you put on Animal Planet, the two most popular shows are Bigfoot, or Finding Bigfoot. I'll let the cat out of the bag. They haven't found him yet. And the other one is the biggest show they ever put on Animal Planet was about the mermaid conspiracy. And they said the Navy is testing supersonic weapons on the mermaids and killing them. And people started freaking out and calling the government saying, why are you killing the mermaids? When you put stuff like that out there, people start to think it's true, because you think Animal Planet, why would they lie to me? Why would History Channel make up stuff? So this stuff is out there in the ether, and and even though Ancient Aliens and mermaids are sort of off the beaten path from politics, it sort of sets the groundwork for where the more political ones come in, because when half of the media environment is everything you know is fake, and the scientists are lying to you, and the government's covering up all this secret stuff, people are going to eventually start thinking in those ways, and looking for more and more um, theories like that, and be more accepting of them. In terms of the relationship with populism, conspiracy theories and populism are in a Venn diagram, they'd be overlapping quite a bit,
Mm.
in the sense that conspiracy thinking is about, it's where you have a worldview in which events and circumstances are driven by powerful groups with bad intentions working against us. And that's what makes conspiracy different than paranoia, because paranoia is the postman is out to get me, or my mother's out to get me. With conspiracy, it's they are out to get us. And that overlaps with populism quite a bit, because populism is very much about, it's us, the true people, the true members of this nation, against them. And they're traitors. They're not really a part of us. They're some other thing. They're an outside invasive force, and they're trying to take advantage of us, conspire against us, injure us in some way for some malevolent purpose. So both of them have this us versus them dynamic, and both of them make assumptions about the intentions of the other, which is, they're up to no good. So the big problem I see there is that when you get leaders who espouse populist viewpoints and use them to mobilize coalitions, that's where you run into the problem. So these views are out there. I mean, if you go jump in any Uber and talk to the driver, or talk to any taxi driver, they're not going to be their views aren't going to be neatly aligned on a left-right continuum. They're not going to be towing a party line one way or the other. I mean, just people off the street, they're going to have views that are sort of a mishmash of this and that and the other thing. They're not going to have clear, constrained ideologies. So what you likely find is, well, I like some social policy, but they're all corrupt. The institutions are corrupt. They're not working for me. They're not working for the common person. It's us against them, with them being the leaders and the political institutions and the media institutions. That's there. It's not that big of a deal. But once you have political leaders who decide to activate that and use populist messages and conspiracy messages to bring that into the political mainstream, just like what happened in the United States. I mean, if you rerun 2016, where it's Clinton versus Jeb Bush, you have a normal election with normal issues that are sort of aligned along a left-right continuum. So the world would be sort of normal if that was the case. But once you throw Trump in, now you have a president who has sort of tilted his party's issue agenda to not really be a Republican Party that I knew back in the 1980s, but to be this populist, conspiracy-driven thing that has abandoned most of its economic policy and many of its other policies from the 80s and 90s, and just adopted this new populist thing. Now, the same thing would happen if Sanders had gotten the Democratic nomination too. I mean, he's probably constrained in the sense that he's much further left than Trump is to the right. But Sanders' entire campaign was built on a conspiracy theory. The 1% controls everything. They're running a rigged system, and they're making it hard for you to survive. Had he gotten the nomination, then we would have a campaign of a populist conspiracy theorist in the Republican Party and a populist conspiracy theorist in the Democratic Party battling each other. And it wouldn't be so much a battle of left-right. I mean, that would be what you're looking at on the surface, but you would have two candidates who weren't all that different, in the sense that they want to blame whatever particular group for all of society's ills. And they would want to scapegoat and say that everything is rigged and corrupt, and that would be where our politics would land.
And then on the social dimensions, because, particularly if there is this alignment between populism and conspiracy theories, and we know that so much of the political salience and efficacy of populism has been derived from the fact that it is being built on, pretty solid foundations of social discontent, emerging social conflicts, and rising social competition. I suppose you mentioned the sort of how embedded conspiracy narratives are in the kind of human condition. I'm sure, even in Britain, of course, this idea that Princess Di was somehow murdered and so on. I mean, these things have always been a part of our culture, and it seems there is human nature to some degree. But there is a spectrum of conspiracy narratives and the social costs of these. I mean, certainly we've seen the rise of some of these sort of immigration related conspiracy theories, this idea of the kind of great replacement and these sort of white supremacist views, which can have really pernicious consequences when people get caught up in them and start to feel that level of threat, and this starts to feel like it reflects some kind of reality. I suppose that's where a lot of the concern about this mainstream of conspiracy theories is going. So how do you see, what do you see as the key social factors in this sort of dynamism in the conspiracy marketplace at the moment?
So the two kinds of conspiracy theories that concern me are the ones that would lead people to make bad medical and social decisions. So if you're an anti-vaxxer and you're not getting vaccinated, or you're not getting your children vaccinated, I mean, there's a social cost there, because you could bring back a disease that was cured 20 years ago. Same thing with COVID-19. If you think that this is all a hoax and you're not going to social distance or wash your hands, then you are likely to spread the disease further, causing serious social and medical harms to people. The other kind that I am very concerned about are those that scapegoat vulnerable groups. I don't like conspiracy theories that scapegoat anyone, because that can lead to bad stuff. But when it's done to people who are powerful, so for example, if you're talking about conspiracy theories that accuse Trump of doing whatever, all right, Trump is well protected, he's got a secret service, and but when we start getting into conspiracy theories about vulnerable populations like immigrants, ethnic minorities, then you start creating a target for somebody to go and injure people, and we've seen that around the world quite a few times in recent years. So those are the two kinds that jump out at me for immediate harm. But all of them have some harm attached to them. I mean, more than half of the U.S. believes that the Kennedy assassination was a inside job or done by the CIA or something like that. The good thing is we don't see these people taking to the street to demand another investigation or shooting people because of JFK concerns they have, because it's so far in the past. But those theories can lead to a degradation in institutional trust, and they can sort of create a space where people just say, well, I'm not going to believe this official report, I'm not going to believe that, why should I believe what they tell me, they shoot the president, so even the ones that aren't that harmful still carry some amount of harm with them.
Yeah, and I think, the threats that they pose to governance, and I guess there's two kind of pathways there. One is just around this kind of undermining of institutional trust in institutions, trust in our democratic instruments. And there's also the erosion of social trust if you start to kind of believe in things that enhances a sense of threat or competition amongst your fellow citizens. And I mean, this is something that we do see some leaders, particularly authoritarian leaders, and some populist authoritarian leaders kind of peddling those socially disruptive forces, because actually it can sometimes be in their interests to have populations divided. Obviously, in terms of long-term governance, it's a really dangerous path to go down. You mentioned COVID-19, so let's let's get into that. So what I'm really curious about is, what are you seeing as some of the most salient narratives around this, the most salient conspiracy narratives? And also, how do these play into more established kind of conspiracy narratives? Are you seeing an intersection with some other kind of conspiracy theories that have been peddling around for a while and just trying to find a kind of perfect home?
So it has found a perfect home, but there's a confluence of factors that's sort of driving some of the theories about this. But I'll just list off some of the ones that have been gaining some traction. So the two that I've polled on are that that the virus was created intentionally and released intentionally. So sort of the bioweapon idea. And this was talked about by Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas, who's a Republican, and he sort of hinted at this more than a month ago, but he hasn't backed off of it yet. There doesn't seem to be good evidence that this is the case, but he seems to assert it as if it's likely true or probably true. The other one was pushed by President Trump. It's the idea that the effects of COVID-19 are being exaggerated to hurt him in an election year. And he's given a lot of breath to that by calling it the Democrats' new hoax. So those are sort of the mainstream conspiracy theories. Before I tell you the poll numbers, I'll just tell you the other ones. The other ones I saw on Twitter were that I think it was a Dean Koontz novel had predicted this from 1980, and there's a passage in there where they have a deadly Chinese virus that they created in a lab called the Wuhan 400. And people are like, oh my God, he predicted this perfectly. But if you actually read the novel, you find out it's nothing like COVID-19 at all. Other ones are that martial law is about to be instituted. And there's all sorts of Facebook posts and text messages and WhatsApp that are getting passed around saying, put on the TV on Sunday night and there's going to be a big announcement. There's going to be martial law and this and that. That hasn't happened yet. I think particularly initially people started freaking out because there was so much change happening so fast that they started to think that, something was afoot. Other ones, the more interesting ones come from the QAnon community, which is a group of people who believe that President Trump is in a battle against the satanic deep state child molesters, and they are using COVID-19. Either Trump spread COVID-19 to kill the deep state, or the deep state spread COVID-19 to thwart Trump's presidency. But they think that Trump right now has shut down the economy so that he can rescue all the children from the underground satanic ritual tunnels. So if you go on Twitter and you look up mole children, MOLE children, there's this whole thing taking place now where there's a contingent of people who believe that there's thousands of children being rescued from underground tunnels who were previously being used for satanic rituals or something.
Can I ask you just about QAnon? Because, I mean, this is a sort of extraordinary conspiracy nexus that it doesn't get a huge amount of attention over this way, but it seems to have been playing quite an outsized role in the sort of conspiracy communities in the US. The demographics of these people who are subscribing to QAnon, are they your traditional conspiracy theorists, these people who have been likely to think that 9/11 was an inside job and obsess around JFK's assassination and so on, or is there something that's kind of unique about them and their relationship with Donald Trump?
So what we find when we poll on QAnon support is that these people aren't far right or far left. And in fact, they come down somewhere in the middle, most of them. You have equal number of right and left subscribing to this. It's small numbers. That's good. I mean, between 6 and 10% is what polls tell us. And that's probably a slight overestimation. Um, these folks despise the establishment writ large. So their view is that they want all of the elites, with the exception of Trump, sent to Guantanamo and summarily hung for their crimes. So whether it's the Bushes or the Clintons or the Obamas, they want them all done away with. And they see themselves as trapped in a battle between good and evil. And of course, they're on the good side, and all the political and economic elites are on the evil side. Now, as crazy as all of it sounds, the groundwork for this stuff has been laid for decades, if not millennia. I mean, the idea that there are people stealing children and sex trafficking, all this, has been around for a long, long time. The idea that there's a deep state has been around for a long, long time. The idea that these two things are together. I mean, a really good example I could give you of this is Oliver Stone's film JFK, which was really big in the early 1990s, mainstream film. But it suggested that there was a group of deep state operators who were pedophiles who were working against the president and eventually killed him. And that's essentially what QAnon is. It's the plot of Oliver Stone's JFK, just played out in real time with secret clues and YouTube and Twitter involved. So the ideas there aren't particularly new, but it's really appealing to people who are sort of off the beaten path of partisan politics.
And are you seeing, I mean, one of the most prominent conspiracy theories about coronavirus here in the UK is around its alleged relationship with 5G technologies. Now, it seems to me, again, that's been a sort of perfect storm, because the moment of which this pandemic hit, you've got firstly this kind of underbelly of, I suppose, contention around vaccinations, this whole anti-vax movement, and that sort of skepticism that was promoting around public health messages. You also had this situation where these discussions about 5G technology was at a fever pitch, because of course the Huawei debates about China's kind of provision of these technologies. So you have this like health, China, and technology nexus, which seems to have come together. And we've seen people setting 5G masts, telephone masts alight. This idea that somehow that these telephone masts are spreading the virus. There's quite a few bizarre incarnations of this. Are you seeing anything about that conversation in the US? And what about conspiracy narratives around the geopolitical elements of this? Particularly, we've seen this kind of escalation of the relations between the US and China. Are you seeing, I suppose President Trump's been seizing every political opportunity he can, but are you seeing these questions about China's role and intent and involvement starting to filter down into public opinion?
Yeah, so the two conspiracy theories that I polled on in mid-March, which was right near the beginning, we actually got really strong numbers back on. So we asked if it was a bioweapon, and we asked if it was being exaggerated for political purposes. And we got 31% agreed that it was created and released intentionally, and 29% agreed that it was designed to hurt President Trump. Those are pretty high numbers for this sort of conspiracy theory. Normally, if you ask about vaccines, you get 20%. So 30 is pretty high. And part of the reason for that is that you had the president pushing it. You have this being the number one news story out there that everyone is exposed to. Republicans were much more likely to believe that Trump was being intentionally hurt by this. And then Republicans were just slightly more likely to believe that it was a bioweapon. In terms of the 5G issue, I haven't heard about anyone tearing down the towers here, but I know it's starting to happen in the UK and I think some other European countries too. Um, it is getting talked about. It's just our political leaders haven't pushed that, but some of our celebrities have pushed it. So Woody Harrelson, the actor, was spreading stuff, I think on Twitter or Instagram about 5G conspiracy theories, and it said, "Here's a picture of China taking down the 5G towers, right where everyone got infected with the virus." And it turns out it's a picture from Hong Kong from 6 months ago, and it was protesters taking down surveillance towers, not even 5G towers.
I truly believe that celebrities should have been banned from social media for this
Yeah.
entire pandemic. This is just, the risks are too high.
And then I thought it was something having to do with the cast of Cheers, because then Kirstie Alley came out and she put out something, "Hey, what conspiracy theories are you guys hearing? Let's share them all." I'm like, no, don't do that. So I'm just waiting for the Ted Danson conspiracy to come out. In terms of 5G, it hasn't been as big here, but it's sort of bubbling underground. And you have to imagine the same people who are going to be anti-vax, anti-GMO, bioweapon, coronavirus beliefs. These people it's going to be very easy for them to fall into 5G stuff too. But again, a lot of this is more continuity than it is change, because you can go back in time and every new technology that comes out is blamed for something. So you can look at when radio was rolled out more than 100 years ago, people were blaming it for everything. TV, cable, internet, even books, people blame for things a couple hundred years ago. So it doesn't shock me that these theories are there, and that you have a small contingent of people who are going to blame it for whatever problem there is. I think what really concerns me is you're in this perfect storm right now where you have people aren't working, people have to be home, and they're sitting around paying attention only to this, trying to make sense of it. And if they have a mindset that's already disposed, then it might seem like a good idea to go out and fight fire with fire and burn down a 5G tower or something like that. In terms of China, I mean, Trump has called this the Chinese virus. He's tried to gin up xeno to have an enemy to blame for this. So to blame anyone other than himself or his administration, to try to keep the blame somewhere else, whether it's the Democrats or it's China or Joe Biden or something. He will do that. I have seen some studies, preliminary ones anyway, where they looked at when the virus started, how many people were were Googling Chinese food. And then you see when this starts, all of a sudden people stop buying Chinese food because they started associating the Chinese virus with Chinese food, which is somewhat ridiculous. So it's going to play a role, but a lot of it is going to depend on how much our political leaders try to weaponize it in that way. If they don't do it, then I think a lot of that will just sort of go away, and we'll see it as a world problem and fight it as best we can. But if it's continually touted as a Chinese thing that they did to us, then things could get potentially ugly.
Yeah, and I think that this is probably something we'll need to monitor and maybe hopefully check in again with you in a little while when we have a clearer sense of what the transition's going to be like, because in a way there's the role, the sort of social and political utility of conspiracy theories to make sense and explain or kind of harness instruments of the state or whatever during the pandemic itself. But there's a whole new kind of landscape that will face us during the transition as well. So on that note, we'll leave it here for now, and hopefully, as I say, we can check in again in another couple of weeks. I'm aware that you have a forthcoming paper out which has some of this really interesting research that you have discussed today with us that will be coming out soon. So when we post this up, we'll be making sure to link to your Twitter, and we'll, as soon as that research is published, we'll be putting it out in our newsletter as well. But for now, just a huge thank you to Joe, and we hope to speak to you again soon.
Thanks.